They call her Timid Beth Cooper, that meek farmer's daughter who startles at breaking twigs and trembles when selling her father's produce at the Sunday market. The local drunks at Mason's Tavern mock her soft-spoken ways, treating her like some scared little field mouse. What they don't know is that those shaking hands once earned her the title Deadeye Beth, the most accurate shot in 3 states. And what they're about to learn is that this trembling farm girl isn't here to just tend to her father's crops. She's here to protect everything they've built. They really should have asked around about old Jim Cooper's daughter, because Beth didn't quit shooting when her mother died. She just found better reasons to keep her skills sharp. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn wind rustled through the corn stalks as Beth Cooper carefully arranged her produce at the Sunday market stand, her fingers moving with deliberate uncertainty. 5 years of running the family farm alongside her father had taught her patience, especially on days like this when Mason's Tavern crowd started their drinking before noon. Their rowdy voices carried across the square, making her shoulders hunch, not from fear like they assumed, but from the constant effort of maintaining her carefully crafted image. The wooden stock of her competition rifle pressed against her back beneath the market counter, hidden but always within reach. Most folks would laugh if they knew she kept it there, just like they laughed at her seemingly nervous habits. But Beth had learned young that appearances could be the best camouflage. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "Let them underestimate you, baby girl. A hidden weapon is always the most effective." "Hey there, mouse girl," Tom Sullivan's drunken voice boomed as he stumbled toward her stand, his 2 city friends in tow. Beth recognized them from yesterday. The same men who'd been asking questions about local farms, about security, about who lived alone. They'd spent the morning at Mason's Tavern, but their eyes were too sharp for real drunks, their stumbles too calculated. "Got any of that sweet corn left?" Sullivan continued, leaning heavily on her table. "Though with those shaky hands, I bet half of it's on the ground." His friends laughed on cue, but their eyes were scanning the market layout, noting exits, watching patterns. Beth knew those looks. She'd worn them herself in competition, analyzing angles, planning shots. She kept her gaze down, letting them see what everyone saw. Just another timid farm girl, easy to mock, easy to dismiss. The irony would have made her smile if she wasn't so focused on keeping her cover. Just yesterday, she'd taken first place at the tri-state shooting competition, adding another trophy to the collection hidden in their barn's secret room. The same room where she'd spent countless hours training with her mother, learning to hit targets most professional shooters wouldn't even attempt. "What's the matter, Beth?" one of Sullivan's friends slurred, his city accent slipping. "Cat got your tongue?" His hand reached for a tomato, deliberately knocking others to the ground. Beth watched them fall, remembering another time, another mess she'd had to clean up. The night 3 armed men had thought their remote farm would be an easy target, had assumed the shaking hands of Jim Cooper's daughter meant she'd be too scared to act. They'd been wrong, too. The local sheriff still talked about that night, though Beth's name never came up in the official report. Just 3 would-be thieves found tied up in their own truck, each with a perfect shot through their shoulder, identical wounds that spoke of skill no trembling farm girl should possess. The sheriff had taken one look at the shooting pattern and known, but he'd kept quiet. After all, old Jim Cooper's wife hadn't just been the best shot in the county before she died. She'd also been the sheriff's sister. Beth bent to pick up the fallen produce, her movements deliberately uncertain. Above her, Sullivan's friend grabbed another tomato, tossing it between his hands. "Maybe we should teach farmer's daughter here how to keep a proper grip on things." His sleeve rode up, revealing a tattoo Beth recognized from her competition days, one worn by members of the Silver Snake Shooting Club, a group banned from professional circuits for their dangerous and illegal modifications to competition weapons. If they'd been sober enough or smart enough to notice, they might have seen how her trembling stopped the moment they made their threat. They might have noticed how her eyes, usually downcast, now tracked their every movement with sniper's precision. They might have realized that Beth Cooper hadn't dropped a single thing she didn't mean to since she was 12 years old, when her mother first taught her that steady hands meant survival. But they didn't notice. They never did. Just like they hadn't noticed how she'd positioned herself perfectly relative to the market's security mirrors, how she could see every angle of approach, how her father's truck was parked in exactly the right spot for what might come next. They were too busy playing their roles just like she played hers. You know, Sullivan leaned closer, whiskey heavy on his breath but eyes cold sober. We're having a little shooting competition tonight. Private event. Winner takes home a nice prize. He smirked at his friends. Bet you've never even held a gun, have you, mouse girl? Beth's fingers brushed against her mother's last shell casing, worn smooth from years of serving as her good luck charm. Tonight, then. They were planning something for tonight. Her mother's voice whispered in her memory again. Patience, baby girl. Let them make the first move. Your shot will come. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The market crowd parted as Sheriff Reeves approached, his presence carrying the weight of 20 years of law enforcement. Sullivan and his friends straightened slightly, their practiced drunken act slipping for just a moment. Beth kept her eyes down, but her uncle's arrival hadn't surprised her. He always seemed to know when trouble was brewing. Afternoon, gentlemen, Marcus said, his voice carrying the particular drawl he reserved for outsiders. Enjoying our little market? His hand stayed casual near his badge, but Beth recognized his stance, ready for anything, just like her mother had taught them both. Just having a friendly chat with Miss Cooper here, Sullivan replied, his fake country accent thickening. Telling her about our shooting competition tonight. Open invitation, Sheriff, you should come too. Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Mighty kind. Where's this competition being held? Old Miller's barn, out by the creek, one of Sullivan's friends answered quickly. Too quickly. Beth knew for a fact that Miller's barn had burned down last spring. Her fingers traced the hidden rifle stock, counting seconds, noting positions. Well now, Marcus drawled. That's interesting considering Miller's barn isn't there anymore. His casual tone hardened slightly. Want to try again? Sullivan's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. My mistake, Sheriff, must have heard wrong at the tavern. We'll just be going now. He turned to Beth, his smile sharp as a knife. Think about what I said, mouse girl. Sometimes the quietest ones make the best shots. Beth's heart skipped a beat. Those were her mother's exact words, spoken at her last competition before the accident that wasn't an accident. Before the brake lines that somehow failed on the way home from the range. Before Beth learned that some competitions weren't about trophies at all. As the men walked away, Marcus leaned close, pretending to examine a basket of apples. You saw it too? Beth nodded slightly, maintaining her timid facade. Silver snake tattoo, just like the ones Mom described in her journal. They're planning something tonight. Jim know they're back? Not yet. He's making deliveries to the North Farms today. Beth adjusted her produce display, using the movement to scan the square again. They've been watching the farm, Uncle Marcus, testing security, learning patterns. Marcus cursed under his breath. Just like before. Your mother was getting too close to exposing their illegal weapons operation. Now they're back, probably running the same scam. He straightened up, badge catching the sunlight. I'll put Fuller and Martinez on patrol near your place tonight. No, Beth said softly, but with steel in her voice. They'll spot police presence a mile away besides ... She glanced at the retreating figures of Sullivan and his friends. They're not just here for the farm. That invitation wasn't random. Marcus followed her gaze, understanding dawning. They know about you, about your wins. They know something, Beth agreed. But not everything. Not yet. Her hand found the shell casing again, her mother's last lucky charm. Maybe it's time they learned. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the market square as Beth packed up her stand. The crowd had thinned, but she felt eyes on her, not just Sullivan's group watching from Mason's Tavern, but others, new faces that didn't fit the rhythm of their small town. Professional watchers, trying too hard to look casual. Her phone buzzed, a text from her father. "Delivery's done. Heading home. Everything okay?" Beth typed back a quick response, keeping up appearances of normal routine. But, as she loaded the last crate into her truck, her mind was already racing through preparations. The hidden room in the barn, the one behind the false wall of old hay bales, didn't just house her trophies. Under the floorboards lay her mother's legacy. Competition guns modified for absolute precision, hand-loaded ammunition crafted to perfectionist standards, and most importantly, the journal. The one that detailed everything Marie Cooper had discovered about the Silver Snakes, their illegal weapons modifications, and their real business of using shooting competitions as covers for arms deals. Beth had memorized every page of that journal, studied every detail of their operation. She knew their patterns, their preferences, their weaknesses. For 5 years, she'd maintained her cover, waiting for them to return. Now they had, carrying her mother's words like trophies, thinking they were taunting a frightened farm girl. They didn't realize they were walking into a trap 5 years in the making. As she drove home, Beth's hands didn't shake at all. The timid mask fell away, replaced by the focus that had earned her those hidden trophies. Tonight, the Silver Snakes would learn what Marie Cooper's daughter had become, not just a champion shooter, but something far more dangerous. A patient hunter who'd been waiting for exactly this moment. They thought they were arranging a simple ambush. They didn't know that Beth Cooper had turned the entire farm into one giant shooting gallery, with angles calculated down to the inch and distances she could judge in her sleep. Every trembling step, every nervous smile over the years had been leading to this. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Cooper farmhouse stood silhouetted against the setting sun, its worn wooden boards hiding more secrets than anyone suspected. Beth's truck crunched up the gravel driveway, kicking up dust that would help her spot unwanted visitors later. Her father's blue pickup was already parked by the barn, and she could smell coffee brewing, their old signal that they needed to talk. Jim Cooper stood at the kitchen counter, his weathered hands wrapped around a steaming mug. One look at his daughter's face told him everything. They're back, aren't they? It wasn't really a question. Beth nodded, letting her carefully maintained facade drop completely in the safety of their home. Sullivan and 2 others at the market. But there are more. I counted at least 4 watching from different positions. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Jim's fingers tightened around his mug. Marcus called. Said they mentioned Miller's barn. He moved to the window, scanning the tree line with the practiced eye of a man who'd spent decades watching for threats. They're not even trying to hide it anymore. Using your mother's words like that. They want us to know, Beth said, checking that the kitchen blinds were angled just right, another of her mother's lessons about controlling sightlines. They're sending a message. Question is, why now? Jim turned to face his daughter. After 5 years of silence, why show their hand? He paused, studying her face. Unless, how many competitions have you won this year? Beth met his gaze steadily. Enough to get their attention. 8 major titles, all under different names. I was careful, changed my appearance each time, but she pulled out her phone, showing him a photo from her last win. 2 weeks ago, at the Western Regionals, I had to use my real name for the registration. My score, it matched Mom's record. Exactly. Jim's sharp intake of breath spoke volumes. Marie Cooper's final competition score had been legendary, not just for breaking the state record, but for its mathematical precision. It wasn't just a win. It was a message to those who knew what to look for. And Beth had just repeated it, digit for digit. "You wanted them to notice," Jim said softly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You've been leaving them a trail." Beth moved to the old family photo on the wall, sliding it aside to reveal a small safe. "Mom didn't just keep records of their weapons deals," she said, entering the combination. She had proof of everything: the modified guns, the buyer lists, the shell companies, enough to expose their entire operation. The safe opened with a soft click. The night before the accident, she hid copies of everything, not just here, but with people she trusted, time-locked emails scheduled to send if anything happened to her. Jim's face paled. "Marie never told me." "She was protecting you," Beth said, pulling out a thick folder. "Just like she protected me by making sure I knew every detail of their operation. She knew they might come back, might try to find her evidence." She spread photos across the kitchen table, surveillance shots of familiar faces at different competitions over the years. "So, I gave them a reason to return. A score they couldn't ignore, from a Cooper woman they thought they'd silenced." The folder contained more than just photos. Competition records, shell casing analyses, bank transactions, 5 years of careful documentation, all pointing to one conclusion. The Silver Snakes hadn't just killed Marie Cooper to hide their illegal weapons trade. They'd used her death to send a message to other shooters who might notice their operation. "The competition tonight isn't real," Beth continued, laying out a map of their property. "They'll try to finish what they started 5 years ago. But this time?" She traced the carefully planned firing lines she'd established across their land. "This time we're ready." Jim studied the map, noting the subtle changes his daughter had made to the farm over the years. The new fence posts that provided perfect cover, the reflective surfaces positioned at key points, the lighting angles calculated for maximum advantage. Their entire property had been transformed into an elaborate shooting range, designed for one specific purpose. "Marcus wants to put deputies on patrol," Beth said, checking her watch. "I told him no. We can't risk them getting caught in the crossfire. Besides, ... She moved to the barn door, entering a code into what appeared to be a simple security panel. Hidden shutters slid silently into place across all the windows. "We're not as defenseless as they think. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." As darkness fell, Beth and Jim Cooper prepared for what was coming. The barn's hidden room revealed its full arsenal, competition-grade weapons maintained to perfection, each one cleaned and checked weekly for exactly this scenario. Beth's hands moved with fluid grace as she loaded magazines, her movements showing none of the trembling she displayed in public. "They'll come from the north," she said, checking sight lines through specially installed gaps in the barn walls. "The tree line provides cover, and they'll want to use the old logging road for their escape route." She pointed to positions on the map. "Sullivan and his friends will be the visible threat, coming straight up the main drive, but they're real shooters." She indicated the elevated positions she'd identified years ago. "They'll be here, here, and here, just like they were the night Mom died." Jim watched his daughter transform before his eyes. The timid farmer's girl facade melted away completely, replaced by something harder, more focused. She moved like her mother now, with the same predator's grace that had made Marie Cooper legendary in professional shooting circles. For 5 years, Beth had maintained her cover, played the frightened daughter, all while preparing for this moment. "Beth," Jim said quietly, "your mother never wanted this life for you. The hunting, the waiting. Mom wanted me safe," Beth replied, checking the sight on her favorite competition rifle. "And I will be. But first, I'm going to finish what she started. The Silver Snakes thought they could bury their secrets with her. Tonight they'll learn that some shots echo for a long time." Outside, a vehicle's engine rumbled in the distance. Beth's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Movement on the North Road. Multiple vehicles. No lights." It was starting. Beth Cooper took her position, her hands rock steady as she prepared to show the world exactly why they should have checked more carefully into what happened to the last people who threatened her family. The night air carried sounds with perfect clarity, crickets chirping, leaves rustling, and the subtle crunch of boots trying too hard to be silent. Beth tracked the noises through her barn's hidden observation ports, counting footsteps and calculating positions. Sullivan's group was making their way up the main drive, playing their roles as the obvious threat. But Beth's attention was on the quieter movements in the tree line, where the real professionals were positioning themselves. 3 on the north ridge, she whispered into her radio, knowing her father was watching from his position in the farmhouse. 2 more moving through the lower field. They're following Mom's old competition route. A pause. They're using her own course against us. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Jim's voice crackled back, tight with controlled anger. Just like they did that night, using our own property layout against us. Beth could hear him adjusting his position. Sullivan's group is spreading out. They're not even pretending to be drunk anymore. Beth's mind flashed back to her mother's journal entries about the Silver Snake's typical operation. They like to use local troublemakers as their visible front, while their real shooters moved unseen. It was a tactic that had worked for years. Who would suspect a random act of drunk violence was actually a coordinated hit? Beth Cooper, Sullivan's voice boomed across the yard, dropping all pretense of his earlier drunken act. Heard you've been making quite a name for yourself on the competition circuit. Different names, different looks, but always the same perfect scores. He laughed, the sound carrying clearly through the night air. Just like your mother. Beth remained silent, watching through her scope as Sullivan's team took up positions that looked random but created perfect crossfire zones. These weren't local thugs. They moved with military precision, their stumbling act completely gone. You know, Sullivan continued, moving deliberately into clear view. Your mother made the same mistake you did. Thought if she got enough evidence, kept enough records, she could expose us. He kicked at the gravel driveway. Should have stuck to farming just like you should have. Some families just don't learn. Beth's finger rested lightly on her rifle's trigger, but she held her position. This was another of their tactics. Trying to provoke a reaction, get their target to move too soon. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. Patience, baby girl. Let them show all their cards first. Found your trophies, by the way, Sullivan called out. Nice hidden room in the barn. Though you really should change your security codes more often. He held up a familiar piece of paper, a page from her mother's journal. Lots of interesting reading in there. Your mom kept very detailed records. Beth's heart rate spiked, but her hands remained steady. They'd breached the barn security, but they didn't know about the secondary system, the one that had been silently recording their every move since they crossed the property line. Uncle Marcus would be receiving that footage in real time, building an evidence trail that even the Silver Snakes couldn't erase. Here's how this goes, Sullivan announced, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd done this many times before. You come out, nice and peaceful. We have a little chat about those competition scores of yours, about your mother's old records, and about keeping family matters private. Everyone goes home happy. One of his men moved toward the barn's side door, and Beth allowed herself a small smile. 5 years of planning had taught her every angle, every approach. She'd trained for this moment with the same precision she brought to her competition shooting. Or, Sullivan's voice hardened, we do this the hard way, just like we did with Marie. The name hit Beth like a physical blow, but she channeled the emotion into focus. Through her scope, she watched the real kill team getting into position, using the same firing lines they must have used the night they murdered her mother. They were good, professional good. But they'd made one critical mistake. They thought they were hunting a farmer's daughter. Beth's radio crackled softly. 4 minutes until Marcus's team is in position, her father whispered. Need to keep them talking. Tell me something, Sullivan, Beth called out, finally breaking her silence. Her voice carried the same trembling quality they were used to hearing, playing to their expectations. That night, with my mother, did you even give her a chance? Sullivan's laugh was cold. Chance? Honey, your mother made her choice when she started poking around our business. Just like you made yours with those competition scores. Perfect matches to her old records. Did you really think we wouldn't notice? Oh, I knew you'd notice, Beth replied, her voice shifting, dropping the tremor entirely. I was counting on it. The change in her tone was all the warning they got. In the next instant, the carefully planned trap 5 years in the making sprang shut. The farm's automated sprinkler system activated, but instead of water, industrial-grade lighting erupted from hidden fixtures, throwing harsh illumination across the killing ground they'd tried to set up. The professional shooters in the tree line were suddenly exposed, their carefully chosen hiding spots transformed into vulnerable positions. Beth's competition rifle spoke once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. She wasn't aiming to kill, she didn't need to. Perfect shots knocked weapons from hands, disabled scopes, and pinned down the surprised professionals. Each shot was precisely placed, showing a level of skill that went far beyond simple competition shooting. You see, Sullivan? Beth's voice carried clearly over the chaos, all pretense gone. Mom taught me more than just how to shoot. She taught me how to hunt. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Chaos erupted across the Cooper farm as Sullivan's team scrambled for cover. Their carefully planned ambush had transformed into a shooting gallery, with Beth's precise shots hurting them exactly where she wanted them. Through her scope, she watched their professional facade crumble, replaced by genuine panic as they realized just how thoroughly they'd been outmaneuvered. Take cover, Sullivan screamed, diving behind a tractor. But Beth had positioned that tractor 5 years ago, angling its reflective surface to create a perfect blind spot in their defense. Every piece of farm equipment, every fence post, every seemingly random pile of hay bales, all had been meticulously placed to create a complex web of firing lines and dead zones. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. This is impossible, one of the professional shooters muttered into his radio, loud enough for Beth's hidden microphones to pick up. The girl's shooting angles, they're perfect. Like she's... His voice trailed off as understanding dawned. Like I've been practicing them for 5 years? Beth's voice carried across the battlefield, accompanied by another precise shot that shattered the scope on his rifle. Mom always said preparation was everything. She kept detailed records of your tactics, you know. Every approach, every angle you used, the night you killed her. Jim Cooper's voice crackled over her radio. 3 trying to flank through the cornfield. Beth had been counting on that. It was the exact move her mother's journal had predicted they'd make when pressured. You're right about one thing, Sullivan, Beth continued, shifting position to cover the new threat. Mom did keep very detailed records, but you found the fake journal in the barn, the one I wanted you to find. The real records? Another shot rang out, splitting an ammunition bag off one of the flanking men's shoulders. Those went to every law enforcement agency and news outlet in the state 10 minutes ago. Automated email system, courtesy of Mom's last failsafe. Sullivan's curse was explosive. You're lying. We found all her evidence years ago. Did you? Beth's next shot kicked up dirt inches from his boot, forcing him back into position. Mom was thorough. She documented everything about your illegal weapons operation. The modified competition guns, the buyer lists, the shell companies, everything. But her real genius? She hid it all in plain sight, disguised as competition scoring records. Every trophy, every certificate in that room you broke into, they're all encoded with your organization's secrets. Through her scope, Beth watched the realization hit them. She'd spent 5 years maintaining her timid facade, letting them think they were in control, all while using their own arrogance against them, just like her mother had taught her. The daughter's better than her mother, one of the professional shooters said into his radio, fear evident in his voice. We need to abort. Now. No one's leaving, Beth responded, her rifle punctuating each word with precise shots that formed a perfect pattern around their positions. Sheriff's Department has the property surrounded. Those security cameras you thought you disabled? They've been broadcasting everything to a secure server. Your confession about my mother, your attack tonight, all of it's been recorded. Sullivan's laugh turned desperate. You think that matters? We own half the judges in this state. Maybe, Beth acknowledged, watching through her scope as more figures emerged from the darkness, Uncle Marcus's deputies taking up positions. But you don't own the federal agents who've been building a case for the last 5 years. The ones Mom contacted before you killed her. The ones I've been feeding information to every time I competed under a different name. The night air crackled with tension as the truth sank in. Beth Cooper, the trembling farmer's daughter, hadn't just been preparing for this confrontation. She'd been orchestrating it, using their own methods against them. Every competition she'd entered, every perfect score that matched her mother's record, had been a message to both the Silver Snakes and the federal authorities. This is your one chance, Beth announced, her voice carrying the same authority her mother's had once commanded. Surrender now, and you might get to make a deal. Keep fighting. Another shot split the night, this one grazing Sullivan's ear with surgical precision. Well, Mom taught me a lot more than just competition shooting. Sullivan's response was predictable. He broke cover, charging toward the barn with desperate speed. Beth had expected this too. The burst of automatic fire that erupted from his modified weapon illuminated the night, but every bullet hit precisely placed steel plates hidden behind the barn's wooden walls. Modified MP5, Beth commented calmly into her radio. Just like Mom documented. That's federal evidence right there. Her rifle spoke once more, the shot threading through the chaos to find Sullivan's weapon with impossible precision, splitting it in half. But Sullivan had one last card to play. Rolling behind a fuel tank, he pulled out a detonator, the same kind they'd used to rig Marie Cooper's car 5 years ago. You think you're so clever, he snarled. Your mother thought she was clever too. Right up until... The shot that interrupted him came not from Beth's position, but from Jim Cooper's. The detonator exploded into fragments as Sullivan screamed, clutching his bleeding hand. That's for my wife, Jim's voice carried across the yard, steady and cold. Beth used the distraction to her advantage, executing a move that would have made her mother proud. In 3 precise shots, she disabled the remaining professional shooter's weapons, each bullet finding its mark with competition-level accuracy. The sound of multiple sirens filled the air as Uncle Marcus's reinforcements arrived, but Beth kept her focus tight, her rifle trained on Sullivan. You know what your real mistake was? She asked, watching through her scope as federal agents emerged from the darkness, their badges catching the harsh light. You thought killing Mom would silence her. Instead, you created something far more dangerous. A daughter with nothing left to lose and all the time in the world to plan. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The dawn light was still hours away when Beth's radio crackled with urgent static. Beth. Uncle Marcus's voice was tight with tension. We've got a problem. Sullivan's backup just took out 2 of my roadblocks. They're coming in heavy. Beth's mind raced as she maintained her position, rifle steady. Sullivan's desperate laugh confirmed her uncle's warning. You really think we came alone? He called out, still clutching his bleeding hand where Jim's shot had destroyed the detonator. The Silver Snakes don't go down that easy, girl. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Through her scope, Beth caught the glint of approaching headlights on the back road. 3 vehicles moving fast with no lights. Professional drivers. More of the Silver Snake's real operators, not the local muscle they usually employed. Dad, she spoke into her radio. Remember Mom's contingency for the state finals? When those cartel shooters tried to take over the competition? The split and bait? Jim's voice carried understanding. Beth, that's risky. Your mother had a whole security team to back her up. And I've got 5 years of preparation. Beth's hands remained steady as she tracked the approaching vehicles. Plus, they don't know about the new range modifications. Sullivan was shouting into his own radio now, coordinating with his incoming backup. Beth caught fragments of their communication through her hidden microphones. Tactical positions, assault patterns, everything pointing to a much larger operation than even she had anticipated. They're not just here to silence us, she realized, the pieces clicking into place. The farm, the location. Dad, check Mom's last journal entry. The one about the underground storage. Jim's sharp intake of breath told her he'd made the same connection. The Cooper farm wasn't just a convenient target. It was sitting on top of something the Silver Snakes wanted badly enough to risk exposure. Your mother's last investigation, Uncle Marcus cut in, his police training evident in his rapid analysis. She wasn't just tracking their weapons modifications, she found something bigger. Beth's mind raced through years of memorized journal entries. Her mother's last notes had mentioned suspicious shipping containers, unusual ground readings near the old well. At the time, Beth had assumed it was part of the weapons smuggling operation. Now, they're using our land, she said quietly, the full scope of her mother's discovery finally clear. The old Prohibition tunnels under the farm. They've been moving something much bigger than modified competition guns. Sullivan's laugh carried across the battlefield. Smart girl, just like your mother. Too smart for your own good. The approaching vehicles were close now, their engines growling in the night. Last chance, Beth. Walk away. Some secrets are worth dying for. Just ask Marie. Beth's finger tightened slightly on her trigger, but she held her position. 5 years of patience had taught her to wait for the perfect moment. You're right about one thing, she called back. Mom did find something worth dying for, but she didn't just find it. She nodded to her father, who pressed a sequence into his phone. Across the property, hidden floodlights blazed to life, revealing dozens of federal agents in position. Not just Uncle Marcus's local deputies, but a full tactical team. They'd been there all along, hidden in the very tunnel system the Silver Snakes had tried to use. She documented everything, Beth continued, allowing herself a small smile as Sullivan's face showed the first real fear she'd seen. Every shipment, every meeting, every name in your organization, all encoded in competition scores that her daughter would eventually match. Perfect scores that would force you to come investigate, to walk right into a trap 5 years in the making. The approaching vehicles screeched to a halt as their drivers finally spotted the federal ambush. But Beth knew the Silver Snakes wouldn't surrender easily. If anything, the presence of federal agents would make them more desperate. Agent Chen, she spoke into a different radio channel. They'll try to breach the tunnel entrance by the old well. That's what tonight was really about, destroying evidence before your task force could move in. Copy that, the federal agent's voice was calm, professional. But Beth, if they're coming in heavy, you need to fall back. Let us handle this. Beth's response was cut off by the sound of automatic weapons fire. The Silver Snakes' backup had arrived, and they were done playing games. The night erupted into chaos as federal agents engaged with the new threats. But Beth remained focused, her rifle unwavering. Sorry, Agent Chen, she said quietly, tracking multiple targets through her scope. But Mom taught me to finish what I start, and we're just getting to the interesting part. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The night air filled with gunfire as Sullivan's backup team engaged with the federal agents. Beth's competition rifle spoke with surgical precision, disabling vehicles and weapons rather than targeting the operators themselves. Each shot was calculated, deliberate, just like every move she'd made over the past 5 years. Southeast Tunnel is compromised, Agent Chen's voice crackled over the radio. They're using shaped charges, professional breaching equipment. Just like the shipping manifests Mom found, Beth responded, her scope tracking multiple targets through the chaos. Dad, remember where she said their main storage would be? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Extra special. Jim Cooper's voice was tight with recognition. The old grain silo, Marie said they'd modified it, turned the whole thing into some kind of vertical transport system. Through her scope, Beth could see her father moving carefully between covered positions, heading toward the barn's hidden room. There should be a master control panel. Your mother's last notes mentioned something about failsafes. Sullivan, still pinned down by Beth's precise shooting, barked orders into his radio. His professional mask had cracked completely, replaced by desperate fury. "Breach the silo! Destroy everything! We can't let them find—" His words cut off as Beth's shot splintered his radio, the bullet threading through gaps in cover that shouldn't have been possible to hit. "You know," she called out, her voice carrying over the gunfire. Mom used to practice that shot for hours, hitting a target you can't even see just by calculating angles and trajectories. She called it shooting around corners. A new explosion rocked the farm as the Silver Snake's backup team breached another tunnel entrance. Beth had expected this. It was exactly the kind of tactical assault her mother's journals had described. The Silver Snakes weren't just weapons smugglers. They were ex-military, private contractors who'd turned their skills toward illegal arms development. "Beth!" Uncle Marcus's voice was urgent. "They're pushing toward the silo. These aren't just gun runners, they're wearing military-grade tactical gear, some kind of prototype combat suits." Through her scope, Beth caught glimpses of what he meant. The new attackers moved with inhuman speed and precision, their gear unlike anything she'd seen in competition shooting. Custom body armor that seemed to flex and move like liquid metal, helmets with advanced targeting systems that made her competition scopes look like toys. It's not just weapons they're developing, she realized, pieces of her mother's investigation finally clicking into place. The farm, the tunnels, they're using them to test experimental military tech. That's why they needed our shooting range, why they targeted Mom when she got too close. "Smart girl." A new voice cut through their radio channel. Beth's blood ran cold. She knew that voice from old competition recordings. William Drake, former military contractor turned private arms developer. The man her mother had been investigating before the accident. "Marie Cooper was a brilliant woman," Drake continued, his tone casual despite the battle raging around them. "She figured out what we were doing, how we were using small-town shooting ranges as cover for weapons testing. But she made one crucial mistake. She thought evidence would be enough to stop us." Beth adjusted her position, using the skills her mother had taught her to track Drake's voice. He was moving through the chaos with practiced ease, coordinating his teams with military precision. "Let me guess," Beth replied, keeping him talking while she lined up her shot. "You've got buyers coming. Someone who wants not just modified guns, but next-generation combat systems. The kind of tech that needs to be tested away from prying eyes." "Very good." Drake sounded almost proud. "You really are Marie's daughter. She had the same gift for putting pieces together." A pause. "She also had the same weakness. Family. All those encoded competition scores, the evidence hidden in plain sight. She didn't do it to expose us, she did it to protect you." Beth's finger tightened on the trigger, but something in Drake's voice made her hesitate. He wasn't just taunting her, he was leading up to something. "Check your mother's last trophy," Drake said suddenly. "The one from the state finals right before the accident. The one you've been using as a model for your own competition scores." Beth's radio crackled with her father's voice. "Beth, don't—" "Already doing it," she cut him off, maintaining her cover fire while accessing the hidden room's database through her tactical tablet. The trophy in question had always seemed different from the others, heavier somehow. Now as she pulled up its scan, she saw why. "It's not just encoded data," she breathed, reading the complex patterns hidden in the scoring marks. "It's coordinates, dates, names." Her eyes widened as she recognized what she was seeing. "Mom wasn't just tracking your weapons tests. She found your buyers." "International arms dealers," Drake confirmed. "Government black sites, private military companies. All of them very interested in our little innovations. and all of them very invested in keeping their involvement secret. A massive explosion lit up the night as the silver snakes breached the grain silo. Beth watched through her scope as figures in advanced combat suits emerged from the underground complex, carrying crates marked with familiar military codes. This isn't about silencing us anymore, Beth realized, her mind racing ahead like she'd been taught. Tonight was always about moving your product, the attack on our farm, drawing out federal attention. It's all cover for something bigger. Drake's laugh carried genuine amusement. Now you're seeing it. Why do you think we let you spend 5 years playing your little revenge game? Every perfect competition score, every matched record? You weren't just getting our attention. You were helping us test our targeting systems, providing data for our combat suit calibrations. Beth's hands remained steady on her rifle, but her mind was churning. 5 years of preparation, of maintaining her cover, of matching her mother's scores exactly. Had she been playing into their hands the entire time? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Beth's laugh cut through the chaos of gunfire and explosions, catching Drake off guard. You really think Mom didn't plan for that too? Her rifle spoke again, hitting targets with impossible precision. Every competition score I matched, every perfect shot, they weren't just copies of her records. They were bait. Drake's voice lost some of its confidence. Bait? Mom knew you'd use the local shooting ranges to test your combat systems, Beth explained, tracking multiple targets through her scope. So she left me a blueprint, not just of your operation, but of how to corrupt your data. Those perfect scores you've been using to calibrate your suits, they're designed to fail. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The night air crackled with tension as Drake processed this information. Around them, his men in their advanced combat suits began to move erratically, their targeting systems glitching and misfiring. Impossible, Drake snarled. Our systems are based on competition shooting data, Beth finished. Data that Mom spent years analyzing. She knew exactly how to create scoring patterns that would look perfect, but contained subtle flaws. Flaws that would only show up under combat stress. Jim Cooper's voice came over the radio, pride evident even through the static. Just like your mother's last championship, remember what she always said about the perfect shot? Sometimes, the best shot is the one that looks like a mistake, Beth quoted, watching through her scope as more of the combat suits malfunctioned. The Silver Snake's operators were struggling now, their movements jerky and uncoordinated as their advanced targeting systems fed them corrupted data. 5 years, Beth continued, her voice carrying across the battlefield. 5 years of perfect scores, each one carefully designed to mess with your calibrations. Mom didn't just leave me evidence, she left me a weapon. Drake's response was cut off by another explosion, but this one was different. The grain silo's hidden entrance burst open, revealing not more Silver Snake operators, but a full tactical team led by Agent Chen. They'd used the chaos of the malfunctioning combat suits to breach the main storage facility. Federal agents! Chen's voice boomed through a megaphone. The facility is secured. All prototypes and test data are in custody. Beth kept her rifle trained on Drake's position, watching through her scope as his carefully laid plans crumbled. The man who'd orchestrated her mother's death, who'd spent years building his illegal weapons empire, was finally seeing the full scope of Marie Cooper's last shot. Your mother, Drake said finally, his voice heavy with realization. She knew she wouldn't survive exposing us. So she set up something better, a trap that would take years to spring using her own daughter as the trigger. No, Beth corrected him, her finger steady on the trigger. Mom gave me a choice. The encoded data, the competition records, they were a guide, not an order. I chose to spend 5 years playing the scared farmer's daughter. I chose to use your own arrogance against you. Around them, federal agents were taking control of the scene. The Silver Snake's operators, Their advanced suits, now more hindrance than help, were being rounded up. Sullivan and his team, still pinned down by Beth's precise shooting, had no choice but to surrender. "It's over, Drake," Beth announced, finally spotting his position through her scope. "Time to find out if your prototype armor can handle a Cooper family special. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." Drake's response to Beth's challenge came in the form of sudden movement. Despite his combat suit's compromised targeting system, he was still a trained operator. He broke cover in a blur of advanced technology, the prototype armor moving with deadly grace even as its systems glitched and sparked. "You think you've won?" His voice carried across the battlefield. "Your mother thought the same thing, right up until the moment her brakes failed on that mountain road." Beth's rifle tracked his movement, but she held her fire. 5 years of patience had taught her to wait for the perfect moment. Through her scope, she could see the subtle flaws in his armor's movement, hesitations and jerks caused by her corrupted competition data. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." "Tell me something, Drake," Beth called out, keeping him talking while federal agents moved into position. "That night when you killed her, did she laugh?" The question caught him off guard. "What?" "Mom, when she realized you'd tampered with her car, did she laugh?" Beth's voice carried an edge that made even the hardened federal agents pause. "Because she wrote about it in her last journal entry, about how she knew you were coming for her, how she'd prepared for it." Drake's armor sparked again, the targeting system trying to compensate for corrupted data. "You're bluffing. We found all her journals. You found what she wanted you to find." Beth's finger remained steady on the trigger as she recited from memory. "They'll come for me tonight. Drake's men have been watching the house, but they don't understand. A mother's last shot isn't about hitting the target. It's about protecting what matters most." Through her scope, Beth watched Drake process this information. His armor's movements became more erratic as the targeting systems continued to degrade. "That's why you killed her, isn't it?" Beth continued, each word carrying the weight of 5 years of calculated patience. "Not because she discovered your weapons testing, not even because she had evidence of your buyers. You killed her because she found a way to turn your own technology against you. She was going to destroy everything." Drake's composure finally cracked. "Years of research, millions in contracts, she found a way to corrupt the entire targeting system. One bad line of code buried in competition scoring data." Beth allowed herself a small smile. "No, she found multiple ways. And then she taught them all to me." The revelation hit Drake just as Beth's shot rang out. The bullet struck his armor's primary power coupling, a weakness her mother had documented years ago. The prototype suit seized up, its advanced systems crashing as 5 years of corrupted targeting data finally took their toll. "Did you really think I spent all that time at the shooting range just practicing?" Beth kept her rifle trained on Drake as federal agents moved in. "Every competition, every perfect score that matched Mom's records, I was uploading corrupted data to your testing servers, the same servers you used to calibrate these suits." Jim Cooper's voice came over her radio, thick with emotion. "Package secured, Beth. Your mother's full documentation, all the evidence she collected. It was right where she said it would be. Hidden in plain sight." Agent Chen approached Drake's immobilized form, her tactical team securing the prototype armor. "William Drake, you're under arrest for the murder of Marie Cooper, illegal weapons trafficking, and about 24 other federal charges we're going to enjoy listing." But Beth wasn't finished. She approached Drake, her rifle still ready but no longer necessary. The trembling farm girl act was gone completely, replaced by something that made even hardened criminals step back. A daughter who'd spent 5 years becoming the perfect weapon. "You know what your real mistake was?" she asked, her voice carrying across the now quiet battlefield. "You thought Mom's last message was in her journals, her competition records, her evidence files. But it wasn't." Beth knelt beside Drake's imprisoned form, speaking softly so only he could hear. It was in teaching me everything I'd need to know to finish what she started. Behind them, federal agents were securing the grain silo facility, discovering the full scope of the Silver Snake's operation. Illegal weapons, prototype combat suits, and most damning of all, records of their international buyers. Everything Marie Cooper had discovered and documented before her death. "Your mother," Drake said finally, professional respect mixing with bitter resignation. "She didn't just plan for her own death, she planned for everything that would come after." "That's what good mothers do," Beth replied, standing as Uncle Marcus approached with handcuffs. "They prepare their children for the future, even if they won't be there to see it." The dawn was breaking over the Cooper farm as federal agents led Drake and his operators away. Beth watched from her porch, her competition rifle finally at rest across her lap. The scared farmer's daughter act that had fooled everyone for 5 years was gone, replaced by something stronger, a legacy fulfilled, a mission completed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 1 month after the Silver Snake's downfall, the Cooper farm was hosting a different kind of gathering. The shooting range, long used as cover for Beth's training, was now filled with local youth learning proper firearm safety. Her trembling hands were steady as she demonstrated proper stance, her voice carrying the same authority her mother's once had. "Remember what I told you about assumptions?" she asked her students, many of whom had known her only as the scared farmer's daughter who jumped at loud noises. "They're usually wrong," the class responded in unison, making Beth smile. These kids had watched the whole town underestimate her for 5 years. Now they were learning the value of looking beneath the surface. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Uncle Marcus leaned against the range fence, watching his niece teach. "You know," he said to Jim Cooper, who stood beside him, "Marie would be proud. Not just of how Beth brought down Drake's operation, but of what she's building now." Jim nodded, his eyes on his daughter as she corrected a student's grip with the same patience her mother had once shown. The Cooper farm had transformed in the past month. The hidden rooms now served as classrooms, the careful modifications repurposed for training rather than surveillance. 6 new students signed up today, Agent Chen reported, joining them at the fence. She'd stayed in town to help process the evidence from Drake's operation, but everyone knew she had another reason for visiting the range regularly. Words getting around about the farmer's daughter who outshot the Silver Snakes. Beth finished her lesson and approached the group, her competition rifle comfortably slung across her back. No more hiding. No more pretending to be less than she was. The local papers had tried to make her into some kind of hero, but Beth had other ideas. "Mom didn't build this place to create heroes," she told reporters who asked about her plans. "She built it to teach people how to protect themselves, how to stand up to bullies who think they can prey on the quiet ones." The barn's hidden room, once filled with encoded evidence and surveillance equipment, now displayed both Marie's trophies and Beth's. Between them sat a new photograph, Beth teaching her first class, her hands steady and sure as she demonstrated her mother's techniques. "Found something interesting in the federal investigation," Uncle Marcus mentioned casually. "Those kids you trained during your scared farmer's daughter act, the ones you taught self-defense to when the Silver Snakes started moving into town, 3 of them helped Agent Chen track Drake's weapons shipments." Beth smiled, remembering the quiet lessons she'd given while maintaining her cover. Even then, she'd been building a network, preparing others just as her mother had prepared her. "Sometimes the best defense isn't a weapon," she quoted, remembering her mother's words. "It's teaching others to stand up for themselves." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the range as Beth's students practiced their shots. Each ping of bullet-hitting target carried the echo of years of patience, of a daughter's love transformed into justice, of a mother's legacy living on through teaching rather than vengeance. Jim approached his daughter, holding something carefully wrapped in soft leather. "Found this in Marie's old files," he said quietly. "She left it for when the job was done." Beth unwrapped the package to find her mother's favorite competition pistol, the one she'd used to win her first championship. Attached was a note in familiar handwriting. "My dearest Beth, if you're reading this, then you've done more than just expose the truth. You've become exactly who I always knew you could be." The scared farmer's daughter act fooled them all, but I knew my girl was a teacher at heart, just like her mother. This gun won me my first trophy, but my greatest victory was teaching you that strength isn't always about who can shoot the straightest. Sometimes it's about having the patience to wait for the perfect moment, the wisdom to prepare others for their own battles, and the courage to be underestimated until the time is right. The range is yours now. Make it what it was always meant to be. Not just a place to learn shooting, but a place to learn strength. All my love, Mom. Beth held the pistol, feeling its familiar weight. Around her, students practiced the same shots she'd once used to bring down Drake's operation. But now, they were learning more than just marksmanship. They were learning her mother's real lessons about patience, preparation, and the power of being underestimated. "You know," Agent Chen said, watching the students practice, "the FBI's training division could use someone with your experience, both in shooting and in teaching." Beth shook her head, smiling. "My place is here. Mom built this range to protect our community. Now it's my turn to continue that legacy." She looked out over her students, seeing in each of them the same potential her mother had once seen in her. Besides, someone needs to teach the next generation that the quietest ones often have the strongest spirits. As the sun set over Cooper Farm, Beth Cooper stood where her mother had once stood, teaching a new generation that true strength isn't about how much noise you make, but about having the patience to wait for the right moment to stand up and be counted. The local drunks who once mocked her still come to Mason's Tavern, but they don't laugh anymore when Beth Cooper walks by. Instead, they tell newcomers in hushed voices about the farmer's daughter who spent 5 years playing scared, only to reveal herself as the deadliest shot in 3 states. They warn them not to judge by appearances because in Pinecrest Valley, the quietest ones are often the most dangerous. And if you listen carefully on competition days, you might hear Beth telling her students the same thing her mother once told her. Let them underestimate you. A hidden weapon is always the most effective, especially when that weapon is knowledge. The end. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.